Yeah, it's well said. Yeah, they are. I mean, at least in an archetypal sense, there to deliver truth that might not otherwise be communicated in the presence of power, right? The comedian is speaking truth to power. Even though it's delivered in a way that's entertaining and funny, it's like, to your point, it's only funny because there's some nugget of truth in there.
Yeah.
And and another thing that makes it funny is like it's something that everyone understands, but not many people want to say or acknowledge for whatever reason. And the comedian kind of steps into that vacuum, I guess.
Yeah.
And if authority starts to attack that, you can bet your ass that kingdom is about to fall.
Yeah.
Because it's divergent from truth, right? When you start trying to cover up, you can't do anything about the truth. The truth is all the time. You can just reorient yourself to it. If you try to deny it or cover it up or move away from it, like you're sowing the seeds of catastrophe ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you look at a truth teller who's not a comedian, like you take a Dr. Robert Malone, such an important voice, such an important role in society. We need that. And there's someone who speak truth directly in a literal way to the best for their ability. But the problem with just that, it's very easy for the centralized powers to spot and do their best to shut down. Whereas speaking the same truth just through the language of comedy, there's a wit that starts to dance around the matrix of deception, stories, and lies that the narrative brings up. So using wit to bypass a lot of that stuff, you can get into people's psyches quicker and without them knowing that, so that they can consider a message. Whereas if you're, okay, I'm going to listen to a podcast with Dr. Malone, people, if they don't want to hear it, defenses are already up.
Right.
But if you can kind of like what comedy does, it's like putting the medicine in cheese and then feeding that to the dog.
Right. Yeah.
My dog, if I try to give her a pill, spit it out. But if I wrap it in meat or cheese, helps it go down. And comedy is the meat or cheese to wrap the message in. Comedy is just a messenger. God forbid comedy was the only messenger out there. We'd all be dysfunctional. It's one of them. And to me, I look at it like we're an orchestra. Everybody who's playing in the truth orchestra, we need different instruments. We need different ranges. So comedians are like, whatever, the saxophone, what you're doing, you're the drums. Dr. Malone, he's the flute. And we need people getting angry. We need people teaching meditation. We need people talking about Bitcoin. We need people doing comedy. We need every member of the orchestra right now to help preserve the song of truth.
Amen to that. And I guess, laughter really is the best medicine, right? Not just individually for someone that's trying to shake off the blues or something, but for mass psychosis itself. We need to actually take stock of what's going on, but also laugh at the bullshit, because laughing at the bullshit is what diffuses the bullshit. Right. If you start taking it so seriously, right? Like, oh, this guy is so powerful and he has this plan for the world and we got to all get behind him or resist him. It sets up, as you're describing, someone like Malone, he's delivering a very direct message. So there's a hardness to it, and it's easy to fight against that. I guess you could have counterfactuals to everything someone says. Right. And you can do this about anything. You can argue about anything until the end of time. But when you wrap it in the meat or cheese of comedy, all of a sudden, it's delivering it in a way that's less subject to those defenses or counterfactuals. So you're almost like Inception in a way, right? You're just incepting these little nuggets of truth, and then they get into people's psyche and they germinate, I guess, something like that.
Absolutely. A good joke will get something into your brain that you couldn't process it coming in. That's why the punchline is always a surprise. Like, oh, I didn't know this was in my head. And so it's like, you like transport secret agents behind enemy lines, whereas just literal information, it's like, well, that's the army tank we can see coming. Right. It's easier to defend against. And I think each time someone laughs, it's breaking a trance.
Mm-hmm.
It's in a best case scenario, it's breaking a trance you didn't know you're in.
Right.
That's why, you mentioned helping break people free of bullshit. So if you can get them laughing at a hypocrisy of the mainstream narrative or any element of the mainstream narrative or the propagators of the
Mm.
mainstream narrative, if you get them laughing at it, you've broken a layer of the trance. Now
Mm-hmm.
there might be 100 more layers,
Mm.
or that could have been the layer that frees the camel's back from all the
Right.
narrative straw. But nonetheless, again, biased comedian here. So of course I'm selling the comedy propaganda, and you're helping me do it, Robert. Comedy is the number one thing. We need to print more money for you to come to my comedy show. No, but for those reasons, the psychological freedom we get from laughter, and therefore the control we get of our own minds that's given to us by laughter, and how that
Yeah.
helps cleanse the trances we're under. I Unfortunately, I think now more than ever in our lifetimes, comedy is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say we're not the only ones thinking this. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson. He's talked for a long time about when they start attacking the comedians, watch the F out, because that's, as we said, the canary in the coal mine. The other thing that comes to mind on that topic is, and I think he got this from Carl Jung, but he says the fool is the precursor to the savior often. So we need someone. We almost have, we call it a trance. Make it sound like it's a bad thing, and it can be a bad thing, but we also have to live in a trance to some extent, right? That's how if you just walk outside today, if you live in a city, you get on peacefully with all these strangers, right? That's not normal in the context of human history.
Yeah.
Like, we've built these useful fictions, like, civil liberties and property rights and money, all these things, really, so we can have harmonious interaction with one another in a high trust environment, I guess you could say. I don't know, an environment where trust comes pretty easily, right? You can walk into a restaurant, sit down at a table. You're not concerned about the people in the restaurant probably aren't going to kill you. I mean, one of them might, but probably not. The problem comes when those useful fictions are twisted to serve the interest of some individual or some group. Right? Someone's trying to take control of the narrative to drive it a certain direction. Whereas in reality, we need the comedians are calling out this bullshit, like someone trying to take a hold of the narrative, diverging the narrative or the useful fiction from truth. That's what comedians are highlighting. So they can actually be the savior, right? Someone can actually call out, hey, this does not work. So-and-so is trying to drive us this direction. And you can plant that idea with laughter and jokes, and that's a beautiful thing, right? That can actually save the world. Not to sound too hyperbolic, but that's how I see it.
It's one of the instruments in the symphony that can save the world. And I agree with you that there's beneficial trances. It's just like, if you probably don't want to not have software on your computer.
Right.
Computers
exactly.
mostly useless if you don't have software. But what you do want is to choose the software you have on your computer. So I think, yes, I want to be in a trance when I'm walking around downtown, to believe being kind to other people and courteous is a great thing. I also want to be under the trance of believing everybody around me is good until I see evidence otherwise. Right. Those are great trances.
Yeah.
And those can be used against us.
Yeah.
There's a good friend of mine named Mickey Willis. He did the films Plandemic and Indoctrination, the most censored films of all time. Yet here's potential evidence of how much truth they convey. They've still been viewed over 1 billion times.
Wow.
Even though they've absolutely censored off of all mainstream platforms, all big tech platforms. My point being, though, Mickey has a term that he's been using, and it's called weaponized morality. So you take someone who's good and moral, and maybe you've even chosen like, hey, these are the trances I want. And we might call those values. Here are the values I live by. I want to do good. I want to, if someone's, being hurt, I want to save them. Just all these good values and morals. Well, weaponized morality is when you've got a sociopathic mind. Let's just picture Klaus Schwab for a second, who will manipulate values that people have, manipulate their chosen trances, and get them to do harmful things under the guise of this is a good thing.
Yes.
So, teaching, hey, it's bad to be racist. Dude, I agree with that. Cool. You think it's bad to be racist? Great. So here's how we're going to fight racism. We're going to teach children, we're going to teach white children they're inherently evil because of their skin color. And we're going to teach Black children that they're never going to amount to anything because of their skin color. You're a good person. You don't like racism? Good. Then subscribe to this. And we might say, well, shoot, if I start doing my own thinking, I might recall the words of a guy who did a lot for civil rights named Martin Luther King Jr., who said, don't judge a man based on his skin color, judge him based on the content of his character. If we pretend he has more truth than CNN, we might realize, wow, CNN is people, just for example, trying to push critical race theory. We might look at that and say like, well, that's weaponized morality. The people that works on, it works on them not because they're idiots or morons or because they're bad people. It works on them because they're good people that want to do the right thing. But the problem is they're being manipulated into believing that the right thing is a divisive thing. It's something that slows down the evolution of society. It's something that sets us up for more division, hatred, and being controlled. So I think looking out for weaponized morality, it's used everywhere with Fauci's favorite disease. It's used with climate change. It's used with, almost anything the narrative says that's not in our best interest. Weaponized morality.
I like that term. I use this term moralistic camouflage. But the original, the blatantly obvious one, the almost archetypal at this point, is the Marxist credo, right? From each according to their ability, to each according to their need. It's this beautiful, utopian, simple, elemental phrase. You're like, great, that's the path to future human abundance and peace and harmony. Yet it was that very guise, that whatever, weaponized morality or moralistic camouflage, under which some of, if not the worst atrocities in human history were perpetrated, right? So it's using this idea of you're preying on people's compassion circuitry, right? We all have this, of course, everyone wants to be compassionate and love the neighbor. Like, as long as you're in good shape, most of us, we're not fighting over some economic scarcity, then people tend to be naturally kind of good to one another. Well, the problem is you can prey on that circuitry. You can now implant this idea of from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, to get to this Marxist utopia. Just do whatever I say. And turns out do whatever I say ends up being, give me all the power, all the property, murder who I tell you to murder. And the utopia never comes. Obviously, you fall into total dystopia. And this is the key, is it always contradicts freedom. They're always trying to convince you of or justify coercion in some way. And that, I think, is the core fucking psychological schism on humanity, is this idea of coercion or fiat, right? Fiat just means because I said so. Do this because I said so, rather than because you decided to do so. That is the problem. It barely works with kids, right? You have to raise your kids with fiat. Don't do that. Don't put that in your mouth. Don't touch that. But eventually you hope they grow up to the point where they're just fully formed adults and they can make their own decisions. The idea that we use fiat to govern other adults is insane, actually insane.
Well, I think it fits the definition of insanity really well, being out of your mind. And therefore, I think the solution, easier said than done, but we're working every day to get humanity here. The solution, I think, is doing your own critical thinking, and along with, do your own critical thinking, which also probably means turn off the sources of mind control
Mhm.
because it's invasive. It's like
Yeah.
medication is absorbed through our skin.
Yes.
Like it's kind of on the outside of me, but it goes right into me.
Mm.
Even more so with CNN, just any of the sources of mainstream propaganda.
Mhm.
So we've got to turn that off. We've got to turn on our own critical thinking. But coupled with that, I think we absolutely need the virtue of courage, because we need the courage to be able to say, that doesn't feel right to me.
Mhm.
That's what you're telling me. That's not my truth. That even sounds like a lie.
Mhm.
It takes a lot of courage to do that, especially when you feel like you're the only one. But
Yeah.
by the way, I assure everybody out there, I've been traveling the country for a long time, everywhere from Portland to Florida, everywhere in between, even in the most Portland like cities, and San Francisco is filled with freedom lovers.
Yeah.
So I guarantee if you like freedom, you are on the side of the majority. I promise you that.
Yeah.
So the shame of you're the only one, if you're saying that sounds like a lie, no. The ones perpetrating the lies
Yes.
might tell you that, but you're actually sane when you can have the courage to point something out that feels like a lie.
Yes.
And we're actually, as you said, we're insane when we go out of our own minds and
Mhm.
outsource our thinking to someone else. It's very disrespectful to the divine intelligence that we're
Mhm.
gifted with.
Absolutely.